This is Canon Fodder, episode 49, live from some basement underneath a bar. Not really sure where. With me this week is writer and Twitter poster Max Lethe. Is it Lethe? Lethe?
Actually, as far as I can tell, it's Lethe.
Lethe. Okay,
It's a
so
word. It's a word I picked up. If I looked up the pronunciation of it now, I'm pretty sure that's what Google will give me.
cool. Max Lethe. All right. So you have a book coming out, or is it already out?
It's already out. It's actually
Okay.
been out for about 6 months now.
So you've got a book out, Meme, available at terrorhousepress.com. Before we get into the book that we're here to discuss, why don't you give us a brief overview, let the people know what you're about?
I'm what I would consider a normie when things are all said and done, but on the internet, I occupy weird spaces, and that has invariably led me to whatever we want to call right-wing internet spaces at this point. A lot of people refer to it as dissident right, used to be alt-right. It's whatever you want to kind of call all that. That's the milieu that I've been in for a number of years at this point. And I wrote a book that I think kind of encapsulates some of that early energy that has changed quite a bit, as have I. And I'm not the same person I was when I wrote that book, and I have different feelings about it now compared to when I wrote it. But yeah, that is more or less me in a nutshell.
Very cool. Very cool. I was thinking actually about this before because I was going through my library system's like new releases, because I'll pick up a book here and there, especially nonfiction. I don't like to buy nonfiction anymore. And they have there's this growing genre of shitlibs trying to understand the online right.
Yeah.
And they always miss the mark, right? They literally can't conceptualize. Either they cannot, or they choose not to because it confronts too many uncomfortable contradictions within their own thinking.
I think there's that, and I think that there's a fundamental inability to humanize people that they see as their political opponents or their political rivals. They can't conceive of you as being a quote unquote normal guy with kids and a wife and a house and all these normal things, but in your own private mind and your own private home, you have opinions that are just totally anathema to things that are just shibboleths in their mind, things that are more akin to religion than politics. At least that's
and I think that's well said. And all that is to say that books like yours, right, which go over the early internet, well, not early internet, but would go over, let's say, this thing of ours, as I like to say, or my friend Chris Sandbach says, La Cosa Nostra, right?
Yeah.
Always keeping it vague and therefore cool, right? Understanding that is probably going to be key to avoiding some of the pitfalls and mistakes that earlier people have made, right? And I think it's also it's a cool sort of window into the thinking of the quote unquote old heads that's especially the Zoomers and the alphas that are coming up might not have access to.
Yeah, I would agree.
So even if it's a time capsule, even if it's something that you yourself don't necessarily agree with 100%, still cool. Still, you should go check it out. I believe, well, as of recording, Terror House has it on sale. Maybe, hopefully, that's still the case, and people can go pick it up at discount when this episode releases sometime in October. Fun segue. Your novel, reading the description and hearing you talk about it, seems very inspired by Fight Club, which is the book that we're talking about today.
I don't know that it was inspired by Fight Club, but it definitely deals with it deals with similar themes. Broken people trying to find connection in a confusing world, schizoid personalities, people who kind of fundamentally lack identity and are searching for that in some way. And Fight Club is definitely a book that deals with those issues, as is mine. I don't know that I drew any direct inspiration from this book per se, but I've read a lot of Palahniuk, and his early stuff was better than obviously some of his more current works, and he became a meme in and of itself in some ways, at least in my opinion. But the earlier stuff he did back in the late 90s and early aughts, when he was kind of hungrier, I think it spoke to a lot of guys my age. There was a kind of desperation in it, but also a kind of pent up aggression or pent up rage that came through in his writing that I think appealed to a lot of guys.
Yeah, it's hard to keep that creative edge when you have millions of dollars.
Right.
Even that, and that nothing against Palahniuk. He deserves every penny he got. Sorry if you can hear my dog in the background.
No, that's okay.
But there's something. Yeah, I mean, you're just gonna lose your edge once you're at that level and you're that comfortable. Fitzgerald was kind of like that.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the only book he's had come out since he's kind of lost that financial status, which I don't know that we would want to segue into that whole story now, but the only novel he's written since then was Adjustment Day, and it wasn't particularly great. I read it just to read it, but and he tried to do some unique things with the narrative voice and the plot structure itself, but you could almost sense that he was hungry again. He wasn't just writing like, he wasn't just doing, kind of copy paste of old stuff. He was trying to do something different, and which, I appreciated reading it.
And we'll get into that, because there's also like a couple of Fight Club sequels and prequels that, I think they're comic books even, or at least
the graphic comic stuff. I didn't really pay much attention to that.
No, neither did I. But just thinking about that, it's like, oh wow, so Fight Club has become this product.
Yeah.
Which is the height of irony.
Exactly. Yeah.
That this anti-consumerist manifesto gets subsumed by the system and become it's like punk rock. Punk rock is supposed to was billed as this anti-establishment thing, but it's at the end of the day, you're still selling records, you're still selling t-shirts and Doc Martens, and you're still representing an aesthetic, not even an aesthetic, a product,
Right. It all becomes image,
never
a copy of a copy, and there's a lack of authenticity to it, and you become Green Day singing American Idiot forever.
Right. Never underestimate a marketing department's ability to turn what is unmarketable into the next big thing. So I figured, I mean, we were kind of talking before. Everybody in our sphere certainly knows the film. A lot of people have probably picked up the book. We can go over the basics of the plot if you want to, but I think people will be more interested in talking about the ideas. I know I certainly will, and it sounds like from your notes that's where you're leaning to.
Yeah, I would agree, and I kind of have a little bit of an outline of the plot itself, but not trying to dwell on anything too long, but try to hit certain points that echo some of these themes that run through the book and through a lot of his work. We're introduced to a narrator who is nameless, and we all know why, but is nameless. But I think he does a very good job of kind of dancing around the fact that we don't know who it is. But anyway, we're presented with him as our main character, and you get past the opening pages, and you're led into what I would call his main problem is, his main conflict, which is he just wants to sleep. Can't sleep. You could speculate as to why, but a lot of it seems to be driven by the fact that he is living this kind of soulless bugman life where he is doing the dirty work for the system, and then when he goes home at night, he's a good little system-oriented lapdog, and he consumes as much product as he can, and make sure he's keeping up with the Joneses as much as possible. something's missing in his life. He can't sleep. Several trips to the doctor leads to a doctor recommending that he go to a testicular cancer support group and see what real suffering is. And then he meets Bob and figures out how to cry in the warmth of his big heaving tits, and finds release and is able to sleep. I do think that's one of the more interesting elements of the plot to dwell on, is why that worked for him and what he was getting out of that. So I don't know if you want to chime in there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that Palahniuk, I think, is playing with here. One is the, everybody wants to identify as something these days, right? Everybody wants, there's this crisis of identity that we are seeing being borne out and all over the political spectrum, right? Left, right. I won't get too political or too explicit, but we all know what I'm talking about here,
yeah.
Right? Various flags and such. And even those are basically corporate products. I mean, there's 1 month a year where everybody changes the design, right? They pay billions, hundreds of millions at least to designers to design these things, and then they end up just putting a rainbow flag over it. All that is to say is that Palahniuk, and especially like the Gen X 90s, right, was seeing this, and before the internet was really exploding, where everybody could explore their sort of niche, weird thing, there was no outlet, especially for men, especially for the raw wanting that men have to really end their own lives. And all, like, men have a death wish. And I think that's a big part of this book.
In young children, young boys. I have kids. I have kids varying ages. Let's put it that way. And in all of my boys, I've seen it from day one. The minute they can walk and jump and run, and they just want to push their every limit and take on as much pain as they possibly can to learn those limits. It's a very unique instinct that we have in us. I would agree.
Which, I mean, God bless them, because kids today are certainly at least sheltered from that, or society is really trying to dull that edge that boys have, and we could go into why that may or may not be. But yeah, so I think the support groups that the protagonist goes to are a way for him to find identity that really can't be marketed to. You can't market dying of testicular cancer.
Right.
You can't market being on these drugs that make you grow giant tits, and you just want to cry with a bunch of men as you kind of die slowly.
Yeah.
Or you can't market a cancer not survivor, a cancer patient who just wants to get laid one more time before she dies, and she's like all frail and dying, and
yeah.
So there's an authenticity there that the protagonist is searching for.
I think a lot of it also too is just connection, and in a lot of ways, I think what Palahniuk was doing is he was prescient in the sense that he was observing a phenomena that was really just kind of in its infancy in American culture, which is just the complete alienation of neighbor to neighbor, and your loss of community, the kind of the bowling alone effect that we're all very familiar with at this point. And nobody really talked about that in the mid and late 90s when he was having these ideas, and he ultimately wrote this novel and it became popular. But I do think that he was tapping into something that people kind of understood on an intuitive level, but we didn't have an intellectual or academic piece to go with it. That would come later. But at this point, it feels just so par for the course. I mean, it doesn't feel like it's that astute of an observation in 2024 America, because we're all like, yeah, duh, like we're all familiar with bowling alone meme and deracination and this, that, and the rest. But back then, that would have been, I was a young doll at this time, and you know, so I have living memory of what these changes were like, and there was a very different feel to the mid and late 90s, at least in terms of the connections people, you know, among their community. Obviously, family's family, and people are always going to have some kind of connection in life. But at least we go back to the story. Our narrator seemingly has no family. The only family that is referenced in this novel is his father, and it's very obliquely, you know, basically my dad gave me advice to do this, this, and this. You know, as far as we know, this guy's a total loner. But I also did find an interesting tidbit on what Palahniuk cited was his inspiration to write this novel. And it has to do, I think, with this sense of connectivity or lack thereof. So he was out camping somewhere, and I suppose where he lived at the time would have been Washington or Oregon. And somebody nearby him was playing their music very loudly, and I guess it was ruining his vibe. And he went, he complained, and he got his ass kicked for it. And apparently it was enough of an ass beating to where when he went back to work on Monday, it was noticeable. But he goes back to work on Monday expecting people to bring it up and say, hey, what the hell happened to you? But he said he was struck by the fact that nobody said anything. And that, as a matter of fact, people seem to go out of their way to try to make sort of absent, pointless small talk just to get through the discomfort of having to deal with the fact that he was in front of them with whatever he would have had. I don't know, black eye, this, that, the rest. And that fascinated him. And he referred to it as a form of societal blocking. And it was that fascination which became the foundation for the novel, at least as he puts it. So, right. But I'm sure there were lots of other inspirations that were tied into that. But
well, on the flip side, right? I know he tells this story. He was working in a machine shop, right? And it was you know, hot and miserable day. All they had were these giant, slow rotating fans that could cool down this machine shop in the middle of July, and these things have never been cleaned. They're covered in dust, right? But they're moving so slowly that nothing actually ever falls from it. And this guy that he's been working with has already kind of pissed him off, plays a prank on him. He takes a broomstick and hits the top of the fan, so all this crap falls on him. So Palahniuk just starts wailing on this dude, right? And people are watching, and you know, they have a fight, and then fight breaks up, and at the end of it, he and this guy become the best of friends.
Yeah.
Right. And there's like, there is something to, because I've been in a fight, right? I've been in a few fights actually, and I personally think that you're not really a man until you've been punched in the face.
I agree, and I also I've had the experience myself. I had somewhat of a misspent youth in my own way, and I got in plenty of fights, you know, in those ages between 14 and let's call it 18, 19, when you kind of get old enough to realize fighting is just dumb. But a lot of my better friends were guys I initially fought with. You know?
Right.
That is a very real phenomenon.
And I mean, and the thing too about fighting somebody, most of the time, like let's say if you get into 10 fights in your life, right, just to pick a nice round number, 9 of them are going to stop before any real damage is done, right?
Yeah.
And it's just that 1 out of 10 fights, let's say, and again, it could be 1 out of 100, whatever. I don't know how rare, how often, it depends on where you are, that it's really going to be one for your life.
Right.
You know, but you don't want that one to be your first fight.
No, you definitely don't. You definitely don't.
All that is to say, friends out there, is stay strapped. Anyway.
Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah. So that's what I kind of think the support groups are for. But yeah, continue on your point about the plot.
Yeah, so you know, this works for a time. Our narrator can sleep, and then you enter Marla, and it's funny what Marla ultimately represents in this story. But if you just look at this story from a plot mechanics standpoint, you know, we're very quickly introduced to our main character, and we're very quickly introduced to what he wants. He just wants to sleep, and he very quickly finds an answer in the form of these meetings. But then the first obstacle he runs into is Marla, and Marla ultimately reflects back to him that he's a faker, he's a tourist, and the magic no longer works. He can't sleep. It's at this point in time, immediately after he meets Marla and his sleeplessness comes back, that Tyler is created, or that he creates Tyler. And I just think that's an interesting inflection point in the story, and also in terms of the character development of our narrator / Tyler, in that Marla was this kind of inciting incident in his life that caused him to make such a drastic change as to, you know, develop a schizoid second personality that is realer than real in his mind.
Now I've read a few different places that Marla is actually the first schizoid personality he invents.
Well, that's interesting. I've never heard that.
Somebody somewhere wrote that they read when they were reading, and forgive me, dear listener, it's been a minute since I've read Fight Club, so I didn't have a chance to confirm this for myself, but there's a part in the book apparently where she puts a cigarette out on her skin, and the narrator later wakes up and sees that he has a burn mark on his hand.
Oh, wow. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, it you know, it might not even be there. It could be just the derangement of some guy online.
Well, but if that's true, imagine being Palahniuk. I mean, he'd still be sitting on, he'd been sitting on that one for quite a while.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that it's not true just because what I know of the Fight Club comic sequel is that Tyler Durden comes back in like the form of his and Marla's son or something.
Yeah, I thought I'd heard something to that effect.
Something to that effect. Again, if you want to go and read that yourselves, dear listener, that's not an endorsement from either of us, but you know, it's Palahniuk. So if you're a completionist, go ahead.
I didn't think he actually did that. I thought he turned that over to somebody else. Did he actually write the graphic comic?
No idea. Okay. I think he was involved at least.
I thought I'd heard he was involved in the creative process. He obviously granted them his permission, but I thought he basically let somebody else do that whole thing. But I could be wrong.
Anyway, so yeah, that's one theory about Marla. It's you know, it's funny that, and she shows up to the testicular cancer group.
Yeah,
right?
That's the first.
Which is it's just like the ultimate fuck you. Like,
yes,
it's such an intrusion.
Yeah.
Really, you know, well done by Palahniuk here, because you know, obviously she doesn't have testicles, although in 2024, who knows?
I think it's also just very interesting to note that he's, you know, I don't know that it's just appreciated at the time, but I mean, he's just very clearly setting her up as the antagonist. And it's kind of a weird way to handle a story like this, which is kind of an offbeat romance, if you wanted to go in that direction with it. But I think we could save that for later. But it's you know, he introduces her as this clear antagonist. She becomes the impediment to him getting what he wants, which is just to sleep. And then everything kind of snowballs from there. I did think it was interesting to note, because I recently watched the movie again, and the reason being is my oldest son had summer reading to do that was required, and he's at an age where he can read adult stuff, and he asked me if I had anything to recommend, and I was like, well, you know, you're a teenage boy, this is kind of up your alley, maybe too adult, but what the heck, go for it. So he read it and he thought it was a great book, and then we went back and watched the movie. I probably haven't seen the movie in 15 years at this point, but it was interesting to me in terms of how the pacing in the movie was so slow getting to that point, whereas the book very quickly gets you to this point, which I think kind of emphasizes my point that this is kind of the inciting incident in the story, is the introduction of Marla. This is really where the conflict begins. You know, I thought that the way they handled her depiction in the movie with the whole heroin chic thing was really gross to go back and revisit. I'd forgotten how like remarkably unattractive they made her, which really doesn't come through in the book. And part of that's Palahniuk's minimalist style. He really doesn't describe characters. You never get a physical description of the narrator. You get very brief snippets of physical description of Tyler, but they're few and far between. You get some of Marla, and they do kind of highlight that she is unkempt and she doesn't try very hard to look good. But I mean, I can't remember the name of the actress who played
Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah, who I know is an attractive woman, who everybody knows is an attractive woman, but they found a way to make her look very unattractive in that movie.
So I was in fifth grade when I saw the movie for the first time, and that forever imprinted on me that I just total disgust for Helena.
You just had goth girls ruined for you, basically.
Well, no. There's no.
No, but goth girls can't be ruined.
No, exactly. But I won't get into that. But no, there's a difference between your prototypical goth girl. There is a lot to the goth aesthetic that it requires a lot of work and upkeep.
Oh yes,
the heroin chic sort of I don't care attitude. Like you have to care more to be a goth.
Yeah, really. No, I would agree. There's an effort is being made,
right. And then the total like grunge adjacent scene, I guess, is completely different.
Well, in that period of time too, was that that kind of mid to late 90s was you really could kind of see that on its way out. And I guess the fact that the way it was depicted in popular media at that point was just so over the top was probably an indicator that this is just really on the way out. And it was actually kind of remarkable to reflect how, you could kind of see the difference in beauty standards between periods of time. Not that she was beautiful or even meant to be beautiful in that movie, but they wanted an attractive female lead who they could make look ugly. But mostly it just really reminded me how in the 90s the desired prototypical body type was so thin and how that's changed so much. And hearing my son's commentary on it, because he's young, he's seen a lot of older media, but his mind is, in the present. He's of this period of time. And he was flat disgusted. He's like, oh my God, what is that? The smoking really threw him off because nobody smokes anymore.
Right.
They made it a point to have her smoke in every scene. I'm pretty sure just about every scene she was in, which, I think by today's standards would be considered unattractive. At one point in time, it wasn't. But I thought that was another interesting thing to reflect on in watching the movie.
I mean, it's not like it's like Lauren Bacall, talking to Humphrey Bogart smoking a cigarette to represent like a sex scene. Like, no, everything she does in that film is kind of disgusting. So and I think the excess of, because again, and the thing about Americans is they take everything to the extreme. So, they smoke 5 packs a day, let's say, and that in and of itself is disgusting.
Yeah.
Right. So of course that it's not abnormal that your son would have that sort of.
Well, he also commented on the difference, and this is, to whether it's something worth kind of lamenting or feeling is sad in a way, I don't know. Different people are going to have different opinions on this, but he noticed how thin she was, and he made the commentary. He's like, well, she has no body. And it's like, yeah, at one point in time, like that body type was considered ideal and more appealing. And that like, he just could not, it just did not compute.
Right. It's show him pictures of Kate Moss and he won't know what to do with it.
Right. He's used to, these thick queens that we all kind of worship now, which, again, not to say that I personally am an inclusive guy when it comes to this kind of stuff. I think all kinds of different body types can be attractive. There's obviously certain lines either way you don't want to cross, but it's interesting to note kids in I guess that Gen Alpha or Gen Z territory and how their tastes and their desires and their expectations are just so skewed by popular media. And it does kind of give you an interesting glimpse on how much of an effect that stuff actually has on people.
Right. So one day, he's the narrator's still unable to sleep. He goes to a nude beach, which I always thought was odd.
Yeah.
right? And this is where he meets Tyler Durden for the first time. So what's up? Why a nude? I have my thoughts on the nude beach, but I wanted to see if what's the deal there.
I don't I wouldn't claim to 100% know, but I do think that Palahniuk, especially in his early work, had a tendency to be more philosophical and even at times biblical. I mean, there are lines from this story that are pulled straight out of the Bible, and they kind of strike you when you read them because you're like, why did you put that here? But
I mean, Fight Club could say it's like just an extended Cain and Abel story.
Correct. Or and it's also very Nietzschean in a certain sense. You get the whole Ubermensch Underman thing.
Yeah, there's will to power, and
he I think is clearly doing a lot of things with intent. So the fact that he chose to have him there naked is probably not by accident. I think personally it's an Easter egg. I think it's a way to kind of subtly cue the reader and let them know, like, this is the birth of something. This is the birth of a, not necessarily a character, but an abstraction, or the character within the character. I don't know that there's anything to it beyond that. I know a lot of people, because of Palahniuk's sexuality, would want to read into that aspect of it. Whereas,
and we'll talk about that, because I think especially with the Marla character being the antagonist, there is, there might be a little smoke to those theories.
Oh, I would agree. There's definitely some smoke. Whether or not that was an explicit intent of the novel, or just an expression of who he was coming out in his art, I think that becomes the debate. But yeah, they meet on the nude beach, and you get this this whole scene where he's dragging driftwood up on the sand, and he's trying to construct basically what I think is a sundial in the form of a hand, fingers, digits, what have you. And he's waiting for this one perfect moment, which just so happens to end up being, I think it's 4:06 p.m. And you get two main messages from this scene, and where Tyler comes to the fore, and they're probably worth dwelling on or visiting because of how much impact his character has on the novel. But you get this whole 1 minute was enough. How 1 minute of perfection is worth all the effort, and that's all that you can expect out of life. And if that's what you can get, you need to revel in it. You get that main, and that theme reoccurs throughout the novel quite a bit. That mantra is repeated quite a bit. And then just the present, the idea of being present and being in the present, as opposed to being too future oriented, which I think, they show our narrator very much being in the early parts of the book and the movie. This idea that you're supposed to be here now. And Tyler calls over to him, and I don't know why you would ask this question unless you intuitively know this guy's creating a sundial, but he's, asks him what time it is. And he mentions that he always wears a watch. Oh no, I apologize. Tyler wants to confirm what time it is so he can confirm the moment of perfection. And, I just thought it was interesting the way they handled that. So it's I don't know what your take on that is.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about the beach, right, and especially the nude beach, the whole book is about authenticity, right? And there's and also not sensitivity, but openness, right? And there's nothing more vulnerable than being naked, even if you're like perfect bodybuilder physique. There's a reason that we wear clothes. There's a reason that most people aren't walking around naked, and I've met a handful of nudists, and personally I think that they should put clothes on. Not much to look at anyway,
right?
But yeah, I think this is an attempt for the narrator to be vulnerable, right? And it's in this expression of vulnerability that Tyler is able to get out of his psyche.
That's interesting that you mention it that way, because what I didn't kind of do in my own mind. And at this point in the book, it would be easy to not do, because you kind of still see these two as two separate entities, is I don't really imagine the narrator being there naked, because the way he introduces it, it's how I met Tyler is I went to a nude beach. Now, you don't get a real clear indication of him being nude. He doesn't describe himself as being nude. He doesn't talk about how it feels to be nude. He just stays very anchored in describing the mechanics of what's going on in the moment, and what Tyler is doing in that moment, and what it means to him. And that's really all it is. I mean, you could kind of read this, and because the book has already established a very detached first person voice, and I know for me personally, I read it and I was like, I didn't even think about the narrator being there naked. But when you end up learning the whole story, and that Tyler's narrator and narrator's Tyler, then yeah, he's there naked too. So that is an interesting point that you make. It's an interesting insight.
And that goes to Palahniuk's style. He was at first a journalist before he started writing novels and short stories and fiction, right? And that comes through in all of his work. It's very journalistic. It's very, as you kind of said, bare bones,
Yeah,
sort of.
it's almost extreme minimalism. I think from a stylistic standpoint, and I think that this is a lot of why I was drawn to him at the age when I was reading him, which was when I was much younger, is the very blunt, truncated sentences, writing with verbs and not adjectives. Without getting too much of my own personal background away, but my BA is in English Lit, and and that wasn't because I had some deep passion to be an English professor or anything like that. It was because when I went to college, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Many such cases.
Right. And well, it was, I think, definitely the case for guys around my age. We were really the first generation of everybody got plunked into college one way or the other. And that's when the 4-year degree really became a high school degree. Now, we all thought at the time that we were doing everything the right way, and this is exactly what is expected of us, blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, I ended up with a 4-year degree in English Lit. And, I got slammed with a lot of classics, and I got slammed with a lot of early 20th century American literature and English literature. And you read that stuff enough, and your brain just melts, because it's full of overly complex sentence structures, just purposely inaccessible vocabulary, just long, seemingly endless passages just describing landscapes and everything else. And not that there can't be a place for that in the world of literature. And if that's your cup of tea, then more power to you. But like, that was everything, and that felt like everything that got thrown at us. And then you read something like this, and it's just such a breath of fresh air, because you don't get character descriptions unless it matters, unless it's moving the story forward. You really don't even get scene description. No. I mean, there's very little setting description at all in this story. It's just, you're here. This is where you're at. This is what's happening. Which I think, just from a stylistic standpoint, it is one of the reasons why I think he became a more popular writer. He was just kind of right place, right time, right style. And there were other guys that came before him that did this too. I mean, Dennis Johnson, not quite as popular, very similar style. Bret Easton Ellis, probably equal in terms of notoriety, and has been around a little bit longer, but has a very similar style. Although I would argue he has a little bit more range. He can do a lot of different things.
Yeah, Burroughs is kind of similar in the same way, but he hung out with Johnson, so that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, actually, I love Dennis Johnson.
Yeah. Dennis Johnson he's got some solid work. I'm not
R.I.P. Dennis.
Yeah.
Don't do drugs, kids. But what you bring up about English departments, I think, is correct, right? Especially the Iowa workshop sort of mentality that a lot of mainstream writers try and cultivate. I think Ernest Hemingway is, and I'm not saying anything new here, but I think he really is, besides Shakespeare, the most influential writer of the modern day. And people don't even really study Shakespeare anymore, right? But you can't be a writer these days of any note without tackling Hemingway. And the way that you can do that is either you can copy his sort of minimalistic style, which, by the way, he didn't even really perfect. That all of his bare bones sort of writing was done in editing, right? So you have people who are trying to do that on their first draft, and a lot of the time failing. But then there's also, okay, we're going to do maximalism, right? We're going to try and get away from Hemingway. We're going to try and get more, maybe even more towards Faulkner, even though academia has so many problems with Faulkner. But we're going to even push past Faulkner. We want to be David Foster Wallace. We want to be Barth. We want to be Gaddis. We want to write these tomes that could you could kill a man with some of these books, and we'll do that to show that our $100,000 education was worth it. Of course, Wallace's education wasn't that expensive, but you get my point.
Right, right. And a lot of it at the end of the day, and it becomes a personal preference thing. But if, at least for me personally, a lot of the flourishes you'll read in writers, such as Wallace or Faulkner, they feel, I don't want to, and not to take anything away from their work. These men are geniuses. They have far surpassed anything that I've ever done or will think of doing as a writer in terms of accomplishments. And they deserve all the praise in the world. But I read a lot of that, and it feels to me kind of forced and contrived compared to that more bare bones style. Because at the end of the day, when you look at writing, you just have to ask the most fundamental questions: what are you trying to accomplish with your writing? What is anybody trying to accomplish with their writing? Well, and that goal could actually be multifaceted. You could be trying to exercise personal demons. You could be trying to find out who you are. You could try to do a lot of different existential things with your writing. And I think ultimately a lot of writers are trying to do something existential with their work. But at the end of the day, you have to tell a story. And you have to tell a story that's compelling enough to keep your reader going from point A to point B. And I think what the minimalists like Palahniuk do is they're more adept at that. They're more adept at making sure, like, the focus is the story, not getting too caught off in their own personal tangents, their own flourishes about this, that, and the rest. And even in such a, Fight Club's a very short book. It's a quick read. He still manages to bury a lot of his own worldview in there, and at times it's polemic, but it also is just very plot driven, and just very to the point, which I think, and maybe I'm just outing myself as Grug or something.
I mean, look at your profile picture.
Right, exactly. The Grug Cheddar Man. But anyway, it's. That to me is an art in and of itself, because so many of them, there are so many brilliant minds out there that have and will continue to come up with 150,000 word manuscripts. And I'm not in a position, nor would I dare doubt the brilliance of these people. But it's like, well, what was your goal? Was your goal to kind of flex, or was your goal to just make something that you liked, or was your goal to tell a story and get as many people as you could to read? And, even me personally as a writer, I don't know where I personally come down on this, because, if I'm being honest with myself, I would say that I write for myself, because I'm very much realistic. I know that my book that's out now and any books that come out in the future will probably never be that widely read. Kind of one of the running jokes in our circles is how we all just write books that we can read and pass among one another, and we, struggle to penetrate that bubble that we've created for ourselves. And not to paint this as a negative thing, but so at the end of the day, if I didn't write for myself and I was writing for mass viewership, I would be extremely despondent about my work, and I would hate doing it. But that's ultimately not what it is, at least for me personally. And I would imagine it's not that way for Palahniuk either. I don't think he's writing purely for a mass audience. He's clearly writing for himself. But I do think it is pretty remarkable the way he's able to rein it all in, make it all so nice and tight and neat, and still keep it compelling, and keep you kind of guessing what's coming.
Again and again, from writers that I've read and guys in our sphere that I've talked to, I keep hearing, like, if I wasn't writing, I don't know what else I would do. It really, not even for myself in like a vain sort of way, but just a release valve of one's sanity, right?
Right. 100% agree.
My one friend PCM, he just put out his first novella, and he and I have talked about this a lot. And he is constantly mentioning that, yeah, he wants something to be able to show his kids that, like, look what I've been able to do, and look, I've got this physical, tangible work that I can say I created with my own two hands, and that's important. But also, there's this. I have all these ideas. I orient myself in the world, let's say, and I live this way, but I can't live 1,000 lives on. And I have all these ideas, and I can't live them out, so I have to write them down.
I do think that for writers who are not doing this as a hobby horse kind of thing, if it's really in your blood, I do, and I share that sentiment with you. It is something I have to do. It's a compulsion. I've been doing it since I was very young, and I've been receiving praise for it from a fairly young age, and now doing it in not in a professional sense in that it's a source of income or anything like that, but doing it in the professional sense, in the sense that I want to hold myself to the highest standard and do the best that I can. It does ultimately become a compulsion. I feel like I have to, and a lot of it is what you're describing, is this kind of internal bubbling over of the, for me personally, it's the different voices that end up in my head.
Right.
I don't want that to sound crazy, but you know what I mean? In that,
I mean, that's
you're the type of person who you absorb a lot in terms of your day-to-day interactions, media you consume, ideas that you run through your head or that you pick up from other people. I'm the type of person where I kind of always made the analogy is like, I'm like a cup, and I get full, and eventually it's got to go somewhere. And for me, writing is as much about that outlet and that that quest for sanity as it is anything else. And that's why I've done it in different points in my life when it wasn't an attempt to be productive or do something professional. It was just something I felt like I had to do for my own sanity.
Most definitely. And I think it's something that everyone should at least pursue once, even if it's just a stupid short story. Or, I mean, a lot of people write essays, and I think the Substack model, you have to, if you want to be popular and read, people seem to only be able to, people are only reading the nonfiction essays on Substack.
Yeah.
Which I think part of it is, just that's what people consume these days. Not a lot of market share for fiction, but also they have this neat audiobook format. Like, they have this AI voice that'll read the essay to you. So I think it's just easier because it's basically just a podcast. I personally can't listen to fiction. I have to.
No, I can't either. I've tried it, and I have a really hard time engaging with it when it's audio. It's just not the same.
That's neither here nor there. We'll get back to I guess the if Marla's the sort of intro to the problems that the protagonist is having, then the blowing up of the condo after he meets Tyler
Yeah,
is.
that's an interesting leap. Is here's my problem: a woman I'm attracted to, and I want to have some kind of connection with. So my answer to the problem is I need to create a schizoid personality that's everything I'm not, blow my apartment up, and sabotage my life in every way possible so that I can fall apart. Because that's essentially what happens, and it's when you put it in those terms that you kind of like cock your head and wonder like what, like where, like what is that about? Like what?
And the best part is Tyler's philosophizing of it all, right? Because it's
Right.
not revealed till later that, and it's only kind of assumed. I think it's more explicit in the film that he blew up his own apartment.
Yeah, it's not as explicit in the novel. It is something that is revealed later, and in the book, or I'm sorry, in the novel, it's a little bit more explicit, but it's still kind of this whole idea of, and I do think it's an interesting idea, and there's some truth to it in that, it is only through struggle that we figure out who we are, and it is only through self-destruction that you can build something new. And if you see Tyler slash narrator as a character who's also ultimately trying to find some kind of identity, whether it be an identity he's never had or just something that's not his current self, then the creation of Tyler and the destruction of who he was makes sense in those terms. But it does become a little weird when you also add the layer of Marla, especially considering it's a romance that never really comes to fruition.
Mhm.
I mean, they do have sex, but it's a lot of, frankly, the way it's portrayed, gross. It's definitely not romantic.
It's literally two homeless drug addicts just banging on a mattress that's infested with bed bugs.
Yeah, yeah. It's not in any way. It's not your average romance novel when we get to that point.
No,
That's for
no.
sure.
There. So I had a thought. Yes. Okay. So the reason he has to blow up his life, right, is because the narrator's dead. The
Yeah, that's
reason, or he's slowly dying. He's really not an imposter when he goes to these dying people support groups because he's dying just at a slower rate, but he's succumbing to death, and it's only by getting rid of these crutches that he has that he can really start to build something of himself, to build himself up as a man, to build up a life for himself, to form a goal and a brotherhood. It's this, yeah. I mean, he's
that's actually it's an actually interesting point that you make, and it's one that I've never really dwelled on, but it kind of does line up with the way some other things play out in that Tyler from immediately takes on this. I don't want to call it father like, but maybe more big brother like. He's a stewardly character for narrator, even when he's being destructive, even when he's bringing him temporary harm or messing up his life in some way. He has a rationale for it that is all about the betterment of narrator or the narrator. And yeah, I do think that that's interesting that you do see this theme of rebirth just kind of running through those two characters or through this one character, however we want to look at it. So that's an interesting point that you make.
so his apartment blows up. He asks Tyler if he can stay at his place, and Tyler says yes, only if you hit me as hard as you can.
Which
Right?
is another interesting,
Yeah.
you know,
And
pivot.
yeah, like I mentioned before, I don't think you're a man until you've been punched in the face. And I wonder, because again, I watched the film way too young, like fourth or fifth grade, and it did leave an impact on me. And I wonder how much of my worldview came from watching this movie, because I watched it at least half a dozen times before I was out of high school.
Yeah, I was 19, but it had a very similar powerful effect on me. I mean, it really was a movie that pushed all the right buttons within a particular demographic, and mainly we're talking white guys within. I don't know exactly how old you are. I get a sense from when you tell me you first saw this movie, but guys within about all about the same 10 to 15-year age range. It probably hit on different levels, but it nonetheless, it left this impression on just about everybody within that demographic that watched it. So it definitely speaks to the power of the work.
So they have their first fight, and okay, I think we've waited long enough to talk about the big gay elephant in the room.
Yeah, yeah.
Palahniuk, later came out as gay.
And it was actually really interesting the way he came out, because he came out. I mean, you're talking
kind of begrudgingly.
Very begrudgingly, and actually, if he'd have come out the way he did today, he basically would have. It would have been some kind of hate crime. He was not happy about it. But basically, the long and the short of it is, he did some kind of interview. I think it was with Esquire or one of these kind of artsy left wing publications about whatever forthcoming book he had coming out. I think it was Lullaby at the time. And he had accidentally let slip to the writer who was interviewing him that he was in a relationship with another dude. And he was terrified that was going to come out. And it's kind of interesting if you put yourself in his shoes and think about it, because here's this guy who's built this. He's already in 2003 built a fairly large cult following. And a lot of it is centered around this kind of rediscovery of masculinity that his work, I mean, because all of his work, his early work has that theme, maybe outside of Invisible Monsters. But, you read Fight Club, you read Survivor, two of his more popular early books, and those are running themes in both of those books. And
even Choke had that a little bit.
Choke, yeah, Choke had that too. And I'm sure he was sitting there looking at that going, I'll be, pardon my language, I'll be fucked. This is the image I've built. And I get outed as a gay guy, and nobody's going to respect the work I put out anymore. And so he ended up proactively outing himself because he thought that it was going to come in this forthcoming piece, which it never actually did.
It'd be funny if the guy didn't even know, like he just didn't register to him.
Yeah, exactly. But it was. Yeah, it was just really weird the way it all worked. And I guess the way he did it is he put some audio recording on his website that he then very quickly deleted and issued public apologies to the journalist. And it was just kind of probably a very weird, and for him, probably anticlimactic way for that to come out. And, I have my own personal feelings about all that shit, and whether that's right or wrong, and I think I'm safe to say on this podcast that it's something that goes against my own personal morality. But I would at least give him credit in the sense that he has never been one of these kind of rah who was big on the you have to accept me because of this train.
Right.
He just didn't want people to talk about it, which if that's what you are, and we could get into the whole conversation about why it even happens. I personally think it's, I do think it's a learned behavior, and I do think it's probably in most cases a result of trauma, but I do probably also think there's got to be some genetic component to it, even if there's no quote unquote gene that anybody's ever discovered. But, if that is your lot in life, if that's what you are, probably the best thing you could do is just keep your mouth shut about it. And he pulls that off, I think, well.
Yeah. I mean, very popular in our sphere. Peter Thiel is very much like that. In fact, when he was outed, he made it his mission to destroy Gawker.
Yeah.
Who outed him, so it's just... It's one of those things that for whatever reason, like you said, it occurs. I just don't want to see it, kind of thing. I think it's bad for society.
I agree.
If it's not relegated to the shadows.
It's really weird in my own lifetime watching the way that subject has been handled and the way it's changed so dramatically is, you know, I grew up with a very clear sense of that this was not a societal norm. It wasn't a good thing. It was kind of this inevitable evil that was going to happen. And you wanted to look the other way when it happened and kind of hope that it looked the other way too. But just the dramatic shift in our culture, you know, I'd say 2008 on, I think it was around, it really kicked into overdrive in 2012, if I'm remembering all this correctly.
I mean, whenever Oberg fell or whatever that was.
Yeah, but just the acceleration.
Was that 2015 even?
It might even be later than I'm thinking. It's kind of come in stages, but it's become almost the water we swim in at this point. And it's hard to imagine a time where anybody would have had any reservations about coming out at all.
Right. It's a
but it's the elephant in the room. It is the elephant in the room with all of his work, because
and that's especially because the elements of his life, kind of, he loves to be around men. There's this sort of eroticism with the fighting that you could kind of map, and a lot of people try to map to it. And he's really angry at this woman who's trying to
him and Tyler. He frankly is more in love with the projection of himself he creates in his mind than he is Marla, and he ends up resenting both of them for having a relationship that is outside. He can't be in.
Yeah. And there's that one line, I think it's in the book as well as the movie, but it's like, you know, we're a generation raised by single mothers. I don't think another woman is the answer.
And, you know, and the shame of it is he's making an astute point about the feminization of the American male. And a lot of it became because of absentee fathers or just lack of fathers to begin with. And when you look at Palahniuk's own life, I think his parents divorced when he was around 13 or 14. And his father became more or less an absentee figure in his life. And, you know, he grew up in a very rural blue collar community in the Tri-City area in Washington, in a trailer park. You know, this guy came from very humble beginnings, and God knows what the genesis of his own sexuality really was. But, you know, you have to think that a lot of his work is inspired on and about this unstable father figure he had in his life.
So when I was in college, I took this one, it was a graduate level course. So I was surrounded by grad students, and I forget what the context was. It was something about like the way that the quote unquote online right takes something and tries to make it their own. And this one student was very much like, yeah, it's kind of like these guys will read Fight Club and they won't get it. They won't get that it's about being gay and that whole scene. And I was convinced of two things that day. One, you don't have to be smart to be in grad school. And two, I am never going to grad school.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. Anyway, he got his media literacy award that day, let's say. And it's...
No, I mean, I think personally, where I come down on it is, I think it's laughable to suggest that this novel was ultimately him coming to terms with his own sexuality. At this point, he wrote this book roughly, you'd have to assume, around 1995. It was released in 96. At that point in his life, he probably knew exactly what he was and was living life as such. So to say that this is some sort of reconciliation of that, I find dubious. Now, at the same time, who we are is going to bleed through in our work. It just inevitably does. So is there an element of that to this? Sure. I mean, you know, it's a book that like we talked about earlier in this conversation, one of the key focal points is identity, lack thereof, or creation of it. And, you know, his own personal identity and his sexuality is going to tie into that in some ways. But my own personal opinion is, it's to the degree that it does, it's probably on an unconscious level. I highly doubt that he sat there and drafted an outline with an antagonist that was a purposeful attempt to paint heterosexual relationships in this ugly, disgusting light. But, I get other people want to kind of take that ball and run with it. As you said earlier, I think where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's some smoke. I just don't know that there's fire. Maybe some burning embers.
Okay. So back to the novel. We've got they have their first fight. There's a lot here. They have their first fight. They both feel like this kind of exhilaration, and then soon enough, they are drawing these guys together, and they're building the rules of Fight Club, right?
Yeah.
I was debating, like, do I want to begin the podcast by saying, we're breaking the rules, but that's so gay, honestly.
Yeah.
Like it's the one thing that.
Well, ironically,
I'm glad that the movie exists.
It was the rule everybody broke.
Right.
Nobody kept the rule.
No, I'm glad that the movie was made. I hate that people watched it. Because
similar feelings.
I say that because it's the same with anything that is good. As soon as normies get it, they just ruin it.
Yeah.
So when people talk, it's like, oh, don't talk about Fight Club. It's like, when it's referenced in, I think it was whatever stupid TV show that everybody watches, then I'm like, oh God, this is dead.
Once it's on The Simpsons, it's dead.
Yes, yeah, sure. That's a good insert. I mean, even my wife said, "Oh, you're doing a Fight Club podcast. Aren't you not supposed to talk about it?" And I'm like, "Why do you know what that is?"
That's okay. That's actually pretty good. That's good delivery at least.
Yeah, no. She's hilarious, but yeah, I'm just thinking, like, why do you know that?
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, there are the rules of Fight Club. I think I've got them right here. Rule 1, you don't talk about Fight Club. Rule 2, you do not talk about Fight Club. Just really emphasizing the first rule.
We will talk about Fight Club. Yeah,
exactly. Rule 3, when someone says stop or taps out or goes limp, the fight is over. 4, only 2 guys to a fight. 5, 1 fight at a time. 6, they fight without shirts or shoes. 7, the fights go on as long as they have to. 8, if this is your first night at Fight Club, you have to fight. And
which is probably the best rule of all.
Yeah. And the thing, because it's like it opens up the possibility that you might only ever do one fight.
Yeah.
Right. You go to Fight Club once, you get your ass handed to you. You keep going back, but you just watch these guys, right? And it becomes this communal thing. And the thing about rules 1 and 2, the reason that those are the 2 rules, the quote unquote breakable rules, right? Everything else, all the other rules are procedural, right? They are cultural. They're building the culture of Fight Club. Whereas 1 and 2, they are setting up you live in a society that is built on all these arbitrary rules. It's time for you to break some rules, right? Even just getting into a fist fight with random guys that you might not ever see again, right, is already kind of breaking this transgressive rule about proper society. But by having these 2 rules that everybody's going to break because this thing spreads, it's so popular, you're giving them that first release valve,
right? And just a real life experience, which is a line that gets thrown in the novel and in the movie. And I think they chose to make sure that line was in the movie for a reason. And I think a lot of that's what the fight represents for people. Is it's an authentic experience. It's not something forced. It's not some career driven thing. It's not some consumer based thing. It's primal. It's visceral. It's real. It's just you and another guy squaring up and trading blows, and then shaking hands when it's all said and done, and kind of sharing in the bond of violence that, you know, I think is really one of the more under-discovered or under explored aspects of us as human beings, is why we as men, most men, not only are we capable of bonding through shared experiences of violence, but why we almost crave them. And even if you think about sports, and, you know, say what you will about sports, and I know everybody's got their opinion about sports ball, but if you think about the games purely in and of themselves and what they represent and what they accomplish and just why they're so popular, it kind of goes back to that idea of, well, we're sharing in this bond of violence with one another, which, you know, I think is a powerful thing. So,
yeah, yeah, and definitely there's something to watching sports as opposed to participating in them yourselves, or yourself. And yeah, I think that's well said.
and even if you look at the sports that are on the rise, I mean, look at one of the fastest growing sports in America. It's UFC fighting.
Right, right. That's
And
probably the most popular for the young demographic of
right,
men.
right. And you know, and then if you go full, you go 10,000 feet and look at all of America, it's football. And you know, football is what it is. But what one thing you can't deny is it's an incredibly violent game.
Right. And when they're adding all these rules to safety, right? And I
Yeah,
mean, I guess you're hearing it more and more that they want to make football more safe. But anybody with like an ounce of testosterone, they hear about the rule changes and they're like, "Oh, it wasn't like this in the old days.
right.
I want, you know, like
You talk to
it."
any guy that played the game, and they cringe when they hear that about
Right.
yeah, the idea of making it easy so that guys don't get hurt. Like, no, well, you're killing the vibe. You're
There
killing.
was and one of the things that, like, guys love about Donald Trump, let's say, is he loves the fights. He loves
Yeah,
UFC. You know, he helped Dana White really get that off the ground. He's seems to be at every main event these days, just because of what he's trying to accomplish politically. So he knows where his people are, and yeah, I mean, the man is just he. There's that stupid green text meme of he likes the Gorilla Channel, and he likes watching.
that was good.
He makes the White House interns get Animal Planet footage of gorillas fighting, and he just loves to watch.
Well, I remember when that meme first came out too. Because I was still a very big Trump supporter at that time, you know, and I was like, you know what, I unironically want this to be true.
It's like, yeah, fuck yeah,
Like,
no,
yeah, like
that's awesome.
this is
And
kind of
like
what I want.
the best is at the end of, like, he watches the gorilla fights and then he whispers through the TV to the gorilla, telling him what a great fight he had. And just, yeah, it's you know, this
I'll
is
have to go
supposed to
back and
make
read
fun
that
of
again.
him.
It's been a long.
Oh, it tickles me. There's some of the best writing is honestly a green text story.
I agree. I agree. There used to be, they're not as popular as they used to be, but there used to be Facebook pages and Twitter accounts just dedicated to green
Mhm.
text stories, the best of. And you read some of those green text stories and you're like, oh my God, like that was
Yeah.
great, you know,
Yeah.
but
There's
it,
a
it yeah.
there was a green text story. It was called like the Libertarian Police Department, right? That later got turned into a short story featured in the New Yorker.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I don't know the inception of it. I don't know if it was a short story featured there first and then somebody cribbed that. That seems likely, but it also seems equally likely that somebody took the New York Times, or somebody from the New Yorker wrote a short story based on a green text. And it's like, who's going to cop to that, you know?
Yeah. No.
Or the guy, the original guy who posted it on 4chan, decided to really craft it into something worth publishing in like the biggest leftist rag in the world, you know. So it's like, uh, either way, really interesting. Now you have, instead of on Facebook and stuff, there's just an AI voice on like TikTok and YouTube Shorts reading out classic green texts.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's still alive. That sort of flash fiction is still around, and thriving. But that's, again, neither here nor there.
Right.
Marla, every time, one thing you could say about the story is every time that the narrator has something good going in his life, Marla comes to ruin it.
Yeah.
So he's got Fight Club, he's sleeping kind of, and he's having, he feels fulfilled in his life. Marla calls him. She's tried to kill herself by ODing on Xannies, and Tyler goes and rescues her, and they start sleeping together.
Yep.
And this is where you have that narrator feeling like the third wheel, wanting both Marla for himself, for like to have someone to love and to hate, and then also wanting Tyler all to himself as somebody he can look up to.
And I think that really serves as a point, and this probably really goes back to Palahniuk and his personal experiences in life, because it basically becomes, and I don't know if it was referenced directly in the novel, but it was in the movie, where he felt like the child caught between divorced parents, or the child caught between strained parents in a strained marriage, which it his reaction to it is very childlike in that, well, I want dad all to myself, or
Right, right, and
relationships
that sort of a Oedipal Electra complex, very Psych 101.
Yeah.
And
But
then
he powers through that, though, and Fight Club and the relationship between Tyler and Marla run concurrent to one another, even all the way into the inception of Project Mayhem, which
right.
Comes, I think the key turning point that led to Project Mayhem was after the beating of Angel Face,
Mm-hmm.
which they didn't make it explicit, but you get the sense that that's the one time in Fight Club where somebody didn't stop when it was time to stop.
Right.
And it's Tyler doing it, so you can kind of see why he's the guru, he's the godlike figure.
He's the cult of personality.
So everybody in the group is going to watch while he does this, and they're not going to question him on it, and nobody does except for Tyler, which I thought was an interesting point, because the only one who admonishes narrator is Tyler.
Right.
And it kind of gives you some pause, because you're like, well, this is the Ubermensch. This is the guy this is the aspect of his personality that's supposed to represent all of these hyper masculine, hyper violent aspects of who he wants to be. And you wouldn't think that remorse would be part of that, but he has remorse for that moment. And it also kind of dovetails into this idea of perfection and destroying perfection that runs through the whole novel. And the reason he chooses to target Angel Face is because Angel Face is too perfect.
Right.
He's too beautiful. He's too good looking, and he can't stand it. He's got to destroy it.
And then, so that's interesting too, because I don't know if this line is in the book, but it's one of my favorite lines from the movie, where the narrator, he pulls out, like, one of his teeth falls out, right?
Yeah.
And Tyler says, "Hey, don't worry, the Mona Lisa's cracking," or something like that.
Yeah.
And
several times actually they've referenced the Mona Lisa, but go on.
The narrator and Tyler's hyper nihilism, right? It's almost like vitalistic nihilism.
Yeah.
Because he sees that society, like the narrator's life, society has hit a dead end, and it needs to be wiped clean. It needs to be destroyed in order for something new to take its place, something better. So what is beautiful in this society has to also be destroyed. So yeah, Angel Face is beautiful, right? But he's beautiful in something that is ugly.
Right. He's too beautiful. He's Abercrombie and Fitch beautiful, and that's the kind of beauty he ultimately wants to destroy, because it's inauthentic in his eyes. Yeah.
Tyler, Project Mayhem starts, right, which is kind of an extension of Fight Club, but a cult around Tyler, in which he is exposing these guys to again, this vitalistic nihilism, let's say. There are 5 rules rather to Project Mayhem. You don't ask questions. You don't ask questions. No excuses. No lies. You have to trust Tyler, right? So it's flipping the rules of Fight Club on their head, right?
Yeah.
Whereas where the stars of Fight Club are whoever the 2 guys in the ring are, now the star of Project Mayhem is Tyler, right?
Right.
Where there was expectations that you break rules in Fight Club, especially like you break those first 2 rules, right? Since the narrator breaks the tap rule in Fight Club, now you have to, if you want to be part of Project Mayhem, you have to be bought in. You have to follow every rule, right?
Yeah.
I was doing a little bit of research on Fight Club, trying to see what other people saw, and there's actually like this 2-minute Jordan Peterson clip, right?
I have an idea where this is going to go, and
Right.
Go on.
And he's talking about fascism, and he's like, Tyler Durden is like, Fight Club is I used to be able to do a decent impression. I won't bore you guys with that, but ask my friend Cap or the Prudentialist to do one, and they're spot on. But he says, it's a really interesting fascistic book, and he means that as a negative. He which also it's just also not, it's just such a bad reading. It's like anything that is everything I don't like is fascism.
Right.
Well,
and I do think that so if when you get into the philosophy and the hyper nihilism of Tyler, which on a personal level I find abhorrent. I'm very, very much against nihilism. I think it's the coward's
and
path.
we disavow violence, of course.
Yes, correct. And that's all supposed to be for the realm of Minecraft, and that's where we keep that stuff. But with one of the critiques, or one of the points that I've seen many people try to make about this book is that while Tyler and narrator are ultimately trying to find a way to escape in a totalitarian system of sorts, albeit a soft totalitarianism, but a kind of an all-encompassing totalitarianism that stifles creativity and authenticity and perfection and masculinity and all these other things. The critique becomes is that they ultimately escape that only to find another version of it. And that feels like such a trite point to make, because I mean, we're talking about, Animal Farm type stuff, and we just can't escape it. It's just always going to be there, which the idea of fascism or totalitarianism, that's inescapable thing, that we're always going to have to fight that. And that feels like just such a just standard boomer meme to me, that it's I don't want to believe that Palahniuk was trying to make that point, but then at the same time I'm like, were you trying to make that point? I don't know. So.
It reminds me more of, and I guess the flip side of that, the charitable sort of interpretation is Cincinnatus, and the Roman dictator, where like things have gone so wrong that in order to right the ship, we have to trust in one man's plan, right. And in the case of Cincinnatus, he does it, and he does it, I think, like two or three times even. And this is where you get the George Washington's, right, where he does the same thing. He founds the nation, and then
home, and
and he just wants to go off and run his farm, and that's really Tyler wants to do the same thing. In fact, he wants to blow up the building, right, with himself in it. He wants to die the martyr. If he had that totalitarian, authoritarian streak in him, let's say, like akin to your pick your 20th century dictator, right? He would live. He would find a way to move on and move Project Mayhem to another plane of existence, a larger thing, right? But he wants to die and allow radical freedom It's more anarchistic
Yeah, it
than
is.
anything else.
This is a book that if you wanted to talk about the political slash social overtones, the big buzzwords are going to be nihilism and anarchism, and a lot of the passages about how to make different bombs and things like that. I mean, it literally reads like the anarchist cookbook. And I'm sure, based on the scene that he came out of in what would have been the late 70s, early 80s, that kind of Pacific Northwest scene, he probably imbibed a lot of those cultural references and those memes, and they probably shaped some of his creative thought process to a certain degree. But he also seems to be kind of playing tongue in cheek with it. Kind of pointing out that it's ultimately basically all for naught. I mean, even in the end, Tyler sabotage. I mean, obviously, spoiler alert, but everybody knows the end at this point. He sabotages his own bomb going off that's supposed to destroy the building. That I don't want to get too far afield or go on too many tangents, but I thought that was another interesting between the book and the movie is the movie makes it to where they're blowing these buildings up to reset the credit score so that everybody has this financial reset, which is nowhere in the book.
No, and we could probably, yeah, I mean, we'll take the little bit of time that we have left to maybe talk about the differences between the book and the film. And that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because speed running through the rest of the plot, I don't, because Fight Club runs its course, Project Mayhem runs its course,
and it
we all
ends.
end in this climactic scene at the top of the building, and that is where the book ends.
And there's the cliffhanger at the end where he's in the hospital,
right? Which leads us into the differences between the movie and the book, and where I think the movie is, I get it, it's this great cultural icon, and it's routinely listed as one of the greatest movies ever made, and it was made at a point in time where good movies were still made. And in fact, a lot of people cite that 1999-2000 period as kind of the last hurrah of American cinema, and I tend to agree with them. Good things have been made in the past 25 years, don't get me wrong, but that was when I mean, look, Fight Club was number one its first weekend, but after that, it was an abysmal failure in the box office. And I'm sure it was only
DVD sales really saved it.
Yeah, DVD sales. This is a time where DVD sales could still save your ass on a movie, and you could. I mean, other movies were like this. I think Austin Powers, the first Austin Powers, and it's a weird movie.
Boondock Saints was like that.
It did. It was literally in the theater for 3 weeks, and then it becomes this cult classic on DVD. Well, Fight Club was definitely one of those. And
can I gotta pause us real quick?
Sure.
I just gotta go take care of something, and then we'll pick it up.
Sure.
1 second. So we were talking about the movie before I did that brief pause, and there's just some key differences. I know at the end of the book, Marla also comes with one of the support groups, whereas it's just kind of her and narrator at the end. Palahniuk thinks that the movie was better.
I find that amazing. And obviously I'm not him, I'm not in his head, but who knows whether he's genuine in that statement or not. But when I read the book after having seen the movie, because I watched the movie when it came out the first year it was out, and then I read the book the following year, and I was struck with how much more powerful the ending of the book was versus the movie. And from that point on, the movie was just never the same for me. In fact, it got to a point where I really just didn't like it. And any subsequent viewings I had of it, I was just like, it's just so pales in comparison to the way it hit the first time.
I will say that I think the movie is more rewatchable than the book is rereadable.
That's interesting.
That could just be my brain just needing to be entertained, though.
Yeah, and that could it also, I think his style of writing is it's either one you either really like or you don't. And the reason why I've been willing to slog through a lot of his work, even though I didn't think it was his best work, is kind of trying to capture that feeling that this book evokes. I do think that Rant, which came out in 2007, does a really good job of coming close There are probably days I would tell you that's his best book is Rant, and that's one that does not get a lot of attention. And was never heralded as this great thing or thought about being. Well, I do actually think James Franco talked about turning that into a movie, but
thank God he didn't, because
if you read that book, you'd realize how incredibly difficult it would be to turn into a movie.
He was the guy who was like pushing for Blood Meridian to get made.
Yeah.
I think that's still in development hell, hopefully.
Yeah, that guy's just the death knell of anything that you're trying to convert to a movie. But other major differences, at least if I'm just kind of going through the bullet points, is, we already covered how narrator meets Tyler. That's a big difference. The ending is a major difference. The final chapter is so poetic. It's a shame that nothing like that exists in the book. I do think there's a YouTube video out there where some people tried to recreate what the ending of the movie would look like if they stayed true to the book. And I felt they did a pretty good job of handling that.
Well, that's cool.
Other differences, I think I brushed over the way they targeted the Natural History Museum in the book, not the credit unions, which I think is an interesting choice, because there's this idea of not resetting a financial reset or any kind of egalitarian thought process like that. It's literally just trying to destroy history so that they can hit the reset button and start everything new.
I wonder how much the film was inspired by. When did the film come out?
2099.
99. Okay, so I wonder how much the film was inspired by Oklahoma City, the Unabomber, the first World Trade Center attack.
I think the Unabomber and a lot of the kind of pine tree nationalism that was in vogue, if you go back to 2017, 2018, a lot of that, it does come through in Palahniuk's work, particularly this work. There is a kind of eco-fascism strain that runs through it.
Especially with the soap making, definitely. The fact that he's like selling people's fat back to them.
Right.
Or the jacking off in the soup. It's very much like the devil may care eco sort of terrorism that.
Yeah, there were other,
or at least adjacent. It's not explicitly for those reasons, but you can see that those two halves kind of come together.
I do think another interesting difference that they didn't put in the movie is in the book. In the movie, you're shown the final scene with the boss where narrator beats the shit out of himself and earns this cushy pension buyout package. None of that happens in the book. In fact, he kills his boss in the book.
Right.
He blows him up and blows his workplace up and basically does an Uncle Ted move. And I think that's an interesting choice to change that, because in the book, when Tyler does that, I mean, yeah, sure, his job was soulless. It was terrible. It robbed him of his youth and his vitality, or whatever, however you want to spin it. But did his boss really deserve to die? Probably not. Is he really, ending history or accomplishing his goals by blowing up his sort of low-level middle management place of work? No, not at all. It's just
I think part of that is some fan service, because how many people have, especially in like a soulless corporate job, have just thought about like killing their boss. Like that's the whole Office Space thing,
It's probably also the responsible decision on Palahniuk's part to let that change be made so that he can't be accused of inspiring any kind of workplace violence. It really was remarkable how he found ways to do transgressive things in his work that would later become totally anathema. For example, like, in Survivor, there was a scene where a guy hijacks a plane and wrecks it into a building. And it's done kind of as an act of terrorism. And this is 2-3 years before 9/11 happens. And when maybe even more years before when he actually wrote it. And it was actually, interestingly enough, Survivor was he was discussing selling the rights of that pre 9/11, and 9/11 happens. Nobody will even touch that book. Nobody will even think about making that into a movie. Still to this day, probably has lost, whatever popularity it had, to where you would think
Yeah,
about
I mean, who's really lining up to go see a Chuck Palahniuk
correct,
based
right?
movie these days? Like
Nobody.
and I think he's probably made peace with that fact.
Right, and we kind of touched on this earlier. I don't remember if it was on air or when we were talking beforehand, but guys only have so many stories in them to tell.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so many things you can write about, and he's a guy. He's got 19 novels. I when I was kind of doing some pre-show research, that just struck me. Like 19 novels, and we're not talking about the graphic novels and the other kind of spin-off stuff that he's either put his name on or had some part in. I mean, his own books, and a handful of them are good. A couple of them are really great, but my honest opinion, a lot of them are just really shit. And he became kind of enamored with his own voice a little bit too much. That, and I think he just knew what audience he was serving, and he was serving that audience. And there is a sort of irony to how he's evolved as a writer when you juxtapose it against one of his key messages in Fight Club, which is this anti-consumerist, anti-establishment book, and he himself became part of that.
So Max, I think I'll let that sit there. We're coming up on time. I want you to plug Meme one more time for the people listening. And
sure, yeah. Meme, we'll call it my first novel. It's actually my second. I have another one that was published back in 2019, but it's now out of publication. That's a whole nother story. But Meme is out there. It is available through Terror House for the time being. If it's ever not that way, I will find ways to continue to make it available. Yeah, it's a book that I think a lot of guys in our sphere will like. I think it captures a place and time that is now gone, and it feels like it was a million years ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. I wrote the majority of it back in 2017. I did a lot of extensive rewriting of it in the 2019-2020 period. As you alluded to, there are some similarities between Meme and Fight Club, at least in the realm of dealing with schizoid, split personalities, and lack of identity, lack of connection, seeking authenticity in a world that offers very little of it, and kind of finding it in weird ways. And if my work is similar to Palahniuk's in any way, it's probably similar in the sense that it's about damaged people trying to find connection in a lost world, and but also at the same time trying to have fun with it. And because I do ultimately think that what I came up with was a fun read. So I would highly recommend it to any of our guys. Get the paperback, and if for whatever reason you ever have any trouble with it, feel free to DM me on Twitter. I'm more interested in being widely read than I am making money, so don't hesitate to reach out. So.
And as for us over at the Double Dealer, you know how to support us. You know how to, do all the things. Buy the magazine, subscribe, become a paid subscriber over on Substack. Like, share, send to your friends, all that good stuff. I have a couple books out that you can read as well. Feel free to do that. Substack, yada, yada, yada. Thank you very much for listening. I don't know how to end podcasts, so I will just say insert ending here.